So think about this for a second. What if the exact trait that, makes you a brilliant leader, like your deep empathy, your ability to read the room, your emotional intelligence, what if that is the exact same trait that makes you disproportionately vulnerable to a toxic workplace?
It's a really unsettling thought, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, we spend so much time talking about professional superpowers.
Yeah.
If you've read literally any management book in the last 20 years, you've been told that emotional intelligence, or EI, is the ultimate golden ticket.
Right. It's supposed to be the key to everything. Team cohesion,
Yeah.
leadership, just being a functional human at work.
Exactly. But today, our mission for this deep dive is to flip that entirely on its head.
Yeah.
We're looking at this really fascinating paper by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover. It's called When High Emotional Intelligence Becomes a Liability.
And the central premise of his research is just incredibly counterintuitive.
Yeah.
We all kind of assume that highly emotionally attuned people are the best equipped to handle workplace dysfunction, right?
Because they're good with people.
Exactly.
Mm.
But the research actually shows they are the most at risk of being completely broken by it.
Yeah.
So we are going to unpack the neurobiological reasons why this happens, how it literally hollows out organizations, and what the smartest companies are doing to completely rebuild their relational infrastructure.
Okay, let's unpack this right out of the gate. I was thinking about this earlier. Having high EI in a healthy, functional company is kind of like driving a high-performance sports car on a perfectly smooth track.
Oh, I like that.
Right. The handling is incredibly responsive, it's fast, it does exactly what you need it to do. But taking that exact same sensitive, high-performance car onto a road full of massive craters and toxic spills, you're going to total the car much faster than a clunky armored tank.
That is a perfect analogy because the very mechanisms that make the sports car exceptional are exactly what cause it to break down.
Mm-hmm.
Like a highly tuned suspension feels every single bump, right?
Mm-hmm.
A sensitive steering wheel jerks violently when you hit a pothole.
It's too responsive.
Exactly. In human terms, that heightened sensitivity that makes an emotionally intelligent person so great at building trust, that is the exact same mechanism that processes workplace hostility so deeply.
But before we can really understand why the sports car breaks down, I feel like we have to define exactly what makes the roads so toxic in the first place. Because Dr. Westover is really clear that we aren't just talking about, a stressful Tuesday or a boss who skipped their morning coffee.
Right. Now, the paper draws a really sharp line between normal workplace friction and actual systemic toxicity.
Which is an important distinction.
Very important. Deadlines, resource constraints, occasional arguments, that's all normal friction. But a toxic environment is characterized by the systematic erosion of psychological safety.
So what does that actually look like day to day?
Well, we're looking at persistent incivility. And this isn't always someone screaming in a boardroom. It's often the low-grade, constant disrespect.
Like the eye rolls.
Yes. Eye rolls, passive-aggressive emails, subtle undermining. Stuff that flies entirely under the radar of formal HR complaints, but it just grinds an employee down over time.
It's basically death by 1,000 paper cuts. And the sources point out that this is almost always paired with inconsistent accountability. When the rules apply super strictly to the junior staff, but the top salesperson can just get away with murder.
Exactly. And the research also calls out these communication pathologies. Information hoarding is a prime example of that.
Oh, I've seen that, where leaders or colleagues deliberately withhold context just to maintain power.
Right. Or deliberate ambiguity, where the goals are constantly shifting so you can literally never succeed. All of these factors combine to create what organizational scholars call ambient climates of fear.
Okay, let me stop you there, because ambient climates of fear, that sounds a bit like academic jargon. We're basically talking about a culture where people are just walking on eggshells 24/7, right?
That's a spot-on translation, yeah. Employees might not be actively thinking, I am terrified right now, but their nervous systems are in this constant state of hypervigilance. They're constantly scanning the Zoom call or the Slack channel for social threats.
And the scale of this problem is just staggering. The paper cites this massive 2021 study analyzing over 1.4 million employee reviews, and the findings completely blew my mind.
Yeah, the attrition predictor.
Right. Toxic culture is the single strongest predictor of employee attrition. It beat out compensation, it beat out workload, it even beat out remote work flexibility. People are not quitting because they want an extra 5% bump in salary. They're quitting because they are being emotionally poisoned.
And this brings us to the real tragedy of what we call the EI trap.
The trap for the emotionally intelligent people.
Right. You would assume someone with high EI would immediately spot those red flags and just run the other way.
Because they can read the room.
Exactly. But the data shows they are actually often drawn to these environments initially because high EI individuals are fundamentally optimistic relational problem solvers.
Oh, I see.
They walk into a dysfunctional team, see all that friction, and their first thought is, I can help fix this. I can build bridges.
So if these people are actively trying to fix the culture, why does it end up destroying them? Like, what is actually happening inside their bodies when their empathy fails to work?
Well, this is where the neuroscience becomes absolutely critical. There's this research by Eisenberger and Lieberman that explored how human beings process social threats, things like exclusion, unfair treatment, or public humiliation.
Okay.
And they found that social pain activates the exact same neural threat detection systems in the brain that process physical danger.
Wait, really? So the brain literally cannot tell the difference between being purposely left off a calendar invite and, like,
Right.
being chased by a bear?
Basically, yes. From an evolutionary standpoint, the brain treats them as identical survival threats. If you think about early human history, if you were excluded from the tribe, you couldn't survive.
Right. You'd freeze or starve.
Exactly. Social rejection meant certain death. So the brain evolved to make social pain agonizing, so you would do whatever it takes to stay in the group. And because emotionally intelligent people have a deeper capacity for emotional processing,
Their response is stronger.
exponentially stronger.
Mm-hmm.
They don't just notice the toxic email. Their nervous system rings a 4-alarm fire bell.
I mean, I get the biology, but I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
If these people are so attuned and their brains are screaming at them that they are in active danger, why don't they just read the room and leave? Like, are they just acting like human sponges absorbing all this toxic waste because they think they can clean it up on their own?
That human-sponge dynamic actually stems from a deep reliance on their core skill set.
Hmm.
Think about it. When an accountant sees a math error, they trust their ability to recalculate it. When a highly empathetic person sees a relationship failing, they trust their emotional skills. Their default assumption is just, I need to communicate better. I need to understand my boss's perspective more.
If I'm just a bit more empathetic, I can fix this.
Yes. And the devastating reality they fail to see is that you cannot out-empathize a fundamentally broken, exploitative system.
You know, if you're listening, have you ever found yourself doing that? Endlessly trying to fix the connection with a toxic boss or a hostile team? I mean, it sounds exactly like corporate gaslighting.
It really is.
You're endlessly changing your communication style, blaming yourself, rewriting emails 5 times without ever realizing the router itself was fundamentally broken from the factory.
And that endless, futile effort leads to the catastrophic fallout we see in the research. And let's look at the organizational costs first, because they are massive, even if they don't show up on a balance sheet.
Yeah, let's hear the numbers.
So Porath and Pearson's research on workplace incivility reveals that 48% of employees intentionally decrease their work effort when subjected to toxic behavior.
Wait, 48%?
Nearly half, and 38% intentionally decrease the quality of their work.
That is half of an entire workforce just quietly, desperately giving up.
It completely suffocates innovation, because genuine innovation requires massive vulnerability, right? You have to propose weird ideas, admit you don't know things, ask naive questions.
And in a toxic culture, making yourself vulnerable like that is basically professional suicide.
Exactly. It invites ridicule. So
Yeah.
highly intelligent people rationally choose to self-censor. And the organization slowly ossifies because only the safest ideas survive.
But it's the cost to the individual that really hurts to read about. Because
Yeah.
of that constant social threat, their bodies are just flooded with elevated cortisol.
Yes, chronic stress.
It suppresses the immune system, causes severe sleep disruption, and mentally. It leads to what trauma researchers call learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness is such a profound concept. It was originally developed by psychologist Martin Seligman. It happens when a person repeatedly tries to change a painful situation and their actions have zero effect.
So they just give up.
Over time, the brain just learns that the pain is inescapable, and the person stops trying entirely, even if a real opportunity to escape presents itself later.
Wow.
For highly emotionally intelligent professionals, their core identity is tied to being competent at relationships. So when their signature strengths repeatedly fails to fix the toxic environment, they internalize the failure. They convince themselves they must be inadequate.
Meaning the environment naturally drives away all the empathetic people and only the sociopaths survive.
Exactly. It's what organizational sociologists call a negative selection effect. the company inadvertently punishes emotional intelligence and rewards emotional suppression. So the people unfazed by toxicity thrive, the empathetic people burn out, and the company is left with a brittle culture completely incapable of trust or candid problem solving.
So what this tells me is that if the router is broken at the factory level, telling a burnt out empathetic employee to just, I don't know, practice mindfulness or do more yoga on the weekends, it's not just unhelpful, it's actually insulting.
Very insulting.
The organization needs to completely rebuild its relational infrastructure. So let's look at how the sources say companies can actually accomplish that.
Well, the bedrock of this structural rebuild is what the research terms compassionate leadership. But we really need to define the mechanics of that, because it does not mean just a lack of standards or being overly nice.
Right, it's not just giving out hugs.
No, researchers like Jane Jutton break it down into 4 distinct steps. Noticing when employees are struggling, interpreting that struggle as a systemic issue rather than dismissing it as a personal weakness, feeling genuine concern, and most importantly, acting to alleviate it.
Yeah, because if a manager notices you're drowning in work, expresses deep sympathy, but still demands the massive project by Friday, that just creates cynicism. The action is the crucial part.
Exactly. Let's look at how Patagonia implemented this structurally. They realized their standard, traditional performance review system, where employees are basically just graded and ranked, was generating massive anxiety.
Which it usually does.
Right, so they completely redesigned the mechanics of the process. They shifted from evaluative reviews to supportive check-ins. Managers were trained to act as coaches, uncovering systemic blockers, rather than judges handing down a verdict.
So instead of a manager saying, you missed your sales target by 10%, you're failing, the manager says, you missed the target. Let's look at our internal processes and see what resources you lacked this quarter.
Paradoxically, by making the process less punitive, Patagonia got much more honest, vulnerable dialogue about actual performance gaps. Employees stopped hiding their mistakes.
That makes total sense.
But to your earlier point, relying on individual managers to just be compassionate isn't enough. Amy Edmondson's research on psychological safety emphasizes that safety must be structural and measurable at the team level. You need mechanisms that protect people, regardless of who their boss happens to be.
Which actually brings us to one of my favorite examples from the paper. IDEO, the famous design consultancy, has this practice called ritual dissent.
Oh, yes.
Explain how this actually functions, because the mechanics are brilliant.
It is a phenomenal structural intervention. So, in a ritual dissent session, a team member presents a new idea or a prototype. After the pitch, the presenter is explicitly required to remain completely silent.
And don't they physically turn around?
Often, yes. They literally turn their chair around so their back is to the team. The rest of the team then openly critiques the idea while the presenter simply listens and takes notes.
Let me jump in here, because when I first read about ritual dissent, it sounded absolutely terrifying. I mean, it sounds like a firing squad where you aren't allowed to defend yourself.
It does sound harsh at first.
Right, but is it actually more like a controlled burn in a forest? You know, you're deliberately setting a small, safe fire to clear out the underbrush, which prevents a massive, uncontrollable wildfire of unspoken resentment down the line.
That controlled burn analogy captures it perfectly. By formalizing the critique into a strict ritual, you remove the interpersonal friction. When the presenter is forced to be silent, it short-circuits that natural human instinct to immediately get defensive and argue back.
You literally can't argue back.
Right. It completely neutralizes the normal power dynamics. You create a safe container for blunt honesty. And we should clarify, true psychological safety does not mean avoiding hard decisions. Mistakes are tolerated, but negligent errors still have consequences. Accountability actually increases when fear decreases.
Okay, a controlled burn is fantastic for maintenance. But what happens when the massive wildfire is already raging? Like, how do companies stop the active bleeding for their highly sensitive employees who are already deep in a crisis?
Well, this requires targeted, active interventions. The paper notes research by Aaron and Aaron showing that roughly 20% of the general population processes social and emotional stimuli much more deeply than average.
Which makes them great at reading clients, but vulnerable.
Exactly. These individuals are incredible assets, but they require specific structural support when the environment becomes draining.
The Cleveland Clinic example is super fascinating here. They recognize the immense emotional toll their clinical staff endures daily, so they built a mechanism called Code Lavender.
Right, playing on hospital codes.
Yeah, it operates just like a medical emergency code. If a team experiences a severe trauma like, say, losing a patient or an intensely draining situation, anyone can call a code lavender. A team of trained peer responders physically shows up to the unit with support, meditation resources, hydration, and they actually relieve the staff so they have time to recover.
And while Code Lavender was born in a healthcare setting, the underlying principle applies to any corporate environment where emotional labor is heavily taxed.
Right.
Organizations have to formally recognize emotional labor as real, depleting work that requires recovery time. It's not just an endless soft skill that employees are expected to provide for free.
Wait, let's pause there for a second because I have a serious problem with this code lavender concept in a corporate setting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, isn't this just putting a pleasant lavender-scented Band-Aid on a bullet wound? I mean, giving someone a meditation break and some water doesn't help at all if you send them right back to work for the toxic, abusive manager who shot them in the first place.
That critique is exactly what separates surface-level wellness programs from true cultural change. You're completely right. Support systems are only half of the equation.
Okay, so what's the other half?
If there is active toxicity, a toxic leader, for instance, you need systemic intervention to stop the harm at its source. The paper points to Uber's catastrophic 2017 cultural crisis as the prime example of how to do this.
Right, Uber was drowning in allegations of harassment, retaliation, and just a fundamentally broken, combative environment. They were hemorrhaging talent.
And they realized a meditation app wasn't going to fix it. They brought in an independent third-party, former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, to conduct a massive, totally transparent investigation.
The independence is key there.
Absolutely. An external party bypasses internal loyalties. That investigation established real structural leadership accountability. They didn't just sweep it under the rug. They publicly implemented 47 specific structural recommendations.
Like overhauling HR and firing people.
Exactly. You cannot heal an emotionally intelligent workforce if the company is secretly protecting the toxic leaders causing the damage. The accountability has to be visible, structural, and absolute.
Okay, so to ensure we never need those crisis interventions in the first place, the smartest companies aren't just reacting. They're actively engineering what the author calls cultural antibodies.
Yes, preventing it from taking root.
They treat their relational infrastructure with the exact same strategic rigor as their IT infrastructure or their supply chain because, your technology can be copied by a competitor. Your pricing strategy can be undercut.
But deep, functional, relational capacity. A culture where people solve problems collaboratively without fear. That is incredibly difficult to replicate. It becomes this ultimate sustainable competitive advantage.
Some companies literally bake this into their physical architecture, which I love. Pixar famously designed their entire headquarters, specifically this massive central atrium to force spontaneous cross-functional interaction.
Right, they put everything in the center.
Yeah. The mailboxes, the main cafeteria, the primary meeting rooms were all centralized. The architectural mechanism forced the animators, the software engineers, and the executives to physically bump into each other daily, which strips away silos and builds baseline human trust.
And then you have other organizations that build these antibodies directly into their organizational chart. W.L. Gore, the company that makes Gore-Tex, operates with a flat lattice structure rather than a traditional hierarchy.
So no chain of command?
No fixed chain of command.
Yeah.
If you want to lead a project at Gore, you actually have to convince other associates to join your team. Associates choose their leaders.
Wow, think about how that completely flips the script on toxicity. If a manager is manipulative or takes credit for other people's work or creates an ambient climate of fear, people simply stop choosing to follow them. No one joins their projects.
Exactly. The toxic person naturally loses all their influence and power without HR ever having to conduct a formal investigation. The system itself just starves them of oxygen.
That is incredible.
But to maintain that kind of self-regulating culture, you need continuous learning systems. Costco is highlighted in the paper for their approach to this. They track cultural metrics, things like employee satisfaction and voluntary turnover, with the exact same board-level urgency as a sudden drop in quarterly sales.
Treating it as a real metric.
Right. And the mechanism they use to process this data is what organizational theorist Chris Argyris calls double-loop learning.
Let's break down single loop versus double loop learning for everyone because this is a game changer.
Okay, imagine your house keeps getting freezing cold in the winter. Single loop learning is just walking over and turning up the thermostat. You fix the immediate symptom. In a corporate setting, if a manager is bullying people, single loop learning is firing the manager. Problem solved, right?
Right, you got rid of the problem.
But double loop learning goes deeper to question the underlying assumptions. It asks, Why are all the windows open in the first place?
So in the corporate example, double loop learning is asking, why did our promotion system elevate a bully to a management role? What sales metrics were we prioritizing that blinded us to this person's toxic behavior? You fix the root structural cause. It's the difference between treating a symptom and curing the disease.
And Bridgewater Associates takes this concept of structural transparency to the absolute extreme. They use a system of radical transparency where every single employee maintains public believability scores.
Wait, how does a believability score actually work in practice? That sounds intense.
It is intense. It's essentially an algorithm for credibility. Employees constantly rate each other on various attributes: strategic thinking, reliability, openness to feedback.
And everyone can see it.
Yes. And when a decision is being made or feedback is given, a person's believability score in that specific domain literally weights their opinion. It forces every interaction, every critique, and every strength out into the open. You cannot hide passive aggression or back-channel politicking when every interaction is being explicitly tracked and weighted.
It forces the implicit hidden dynamics to become explicit and observable. And that really seems to be the core realization across all these examples. A healthy culture is never a solved problem.
Never.
You know, it's like they're treating culture as a hard science. Instead of just slapping a teamwork poster on the break room wall, they're constantly experimenting. You don't just put a ping pong table in the break room, write a new mission statement, and walk away. It requires constant vigilance.
Exactly. And the overarching lesson from Dr. Westover's research is so clear here. The people in your organization who feel things the most deeply are not fragile liabilities that need to be managed.
Right.
They're the essential, highly calibrated sensors of the organization's health. When your most empathetic, emotionally intelligent people start failing, burning out, or shutting down, it is the environment that is toxic, not the employee who is weak.
So if you are listening to this right now and you've been burning yourself out trying to empathize and communicate your way out of a toxic workplace, hear this. Your struggle is not evidence of inadequacy.
Definitely not.
Leaving a dysfunctional organization isn't quitting. It's an immune response. Your nervous system is accurately recognizing a dangerous situation that simply cannot be fixed by your individual effort alone.
You are recognizing that your high-performance engine is on a road that is destroying it. You have to remove yourself from the track.
We want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. Consider this. As organizations continue to lean heavily into remote work, asynchronous communication, and AI, the daily, subtle pulse of human interaction gets harder and harder to read.
Oh, absolutely.
So if a toxic company culture drives away all of its emotionally intelligent people, the very people capable of reading that subtle human pulse through a screen or a text-based chat, how long will it be before the organization collapses from the inside out, simply because there is literally no one left who can read the warning signs?
That is a fascinating and terrifying question for the future of work.
Protect your engine. And make sure you are driving on a track that actually deserves your speed.